if you want to watch
I
it.
don't mind watching 3-hour long stuff. You know me, I binge shows in a night.
Yeah.
When we did Anne with an E, I watched the whole first season in one night. Like, come on.
That was over a year and a half ago, by the way, that we did Anne with
Holy
an E.
shit.
Because it was in fall of 2020.
Language. Wow.
Yeah, right? When did we get so
Okay.
old? Welcome. You are entering a strange realm. A realm of what ifs. What if movies, television shows, and video games were better, worse, bizarrer, or downright different? What might they look like? Find out on today's episode of CineCasters. Welcome back to CineCasters. This is the show where we watch movies and TV shows, and then we pitch them back to each other to try and deconstruct them and figure out what maybe worked or what didn't work, or how we might like them better if they were slightly different, in order to try and give us an excuse to talk about whatever we're watching or why we liked or didn't like something. I am Janglez, and today I'm joined by Alyssa.
Hello.
And today we are talking about the super... this movie is really, really strange. I picked it just for you, by the way, because this is a movie that I picked.
I liked it.
Yeah, Alyssa's been on a bit of a bender with, like, gothic westerns. And by bender, I mean, like, obsession for your entire life with gothic westerns.
Yeah.
And so when we were talking about it, we were talking about something that you wrote, something that we had sort of, like, talked about over and over a little bit. And then I was finally like, yo, why don't we just do the Wild Wild West on an episode of the CineCasters? Because it's like right up your alley.
It definitely is. It's a lot more steampunk than the stuff that I've been
you're more into like that gothic.
Or writing or thinking about. But I also really don't mind because I went through a steampunk phase in high school. So
I'm still in a
whatever.
steampunk phase.
It's still good. Like, I'm not out of my phase entirely, but, you know.
I'm a big fan of steampunk, and I think steampunk western is definitely something that I love. I also like the gothic western, sort of dark gothic western fantasy vibe, but I really like this movie, but it's not amazing.
No.
So tell me, like, this is your first time watching it?
Yeah. First time.
What did you think?
Never seen it before. A lot of the stuff that I had written down was literally just like random things that just popped out to me. So first of all, the music was was great. I loved that.
It's like
Just
sort of
the
this
intro,
classic
like,
western
woo!
vibe. Yeah.
This is wonderful. Yeah. And then most of my things actually here are just, they're not really plot related. It's just random little things that I picked up. So first of all, you don't knit chainmail.
Yeah, I noticed. That's like, I literally have, is he knitting chainmail? Like, question
The
mark?
funniest thing was I was knitting and I saw him in the similar pose and went, oh, he's knitting. No, he's not.
Yeah, it's fake.
I was knitting while I was watching it, anyways. And then, like, the glowing eyes when they're, like, they got the dude projecting his last vision. Like, I thought that was, like, super silly with, like, the really awful science there, but also just gave us the same information we already knew. Go to New Orleans.
Yeah, go to New Orleans. Yeah. That's my big problem with this movie is I love the steampunk. And I know that steampunk is already, like, not science, but a lot of the way they try to like play the science off is so incredibly hokey and not how science works.
Yeah.
Like okay, so you know how they have the magnetic saws?
Yeah.
How they can sort of like just change direction on a whim?
That's not how magnets
That's not how magnets work. But also the fact that those saw blades can like spin perpetually. Like they never like that's not how that works. Like eventually you'd run out of like I don't know. The idea of like being a magnetic collar is like attracting a saw blade is an interesting idea in theory, but in practice you realize like you'd have to have the saw blade spin perpetually.
Yeah.
And like just because it's a magnetic collar doesn't mean that that's how that would work. I don't know. It's so silly and I want to love it, but but
they had to have it for you know 2 reasons. One, so they could find the tracks.
Yeah.
And the other one was so they could get the same information about going to New Orleans.
Yeah. But it's good foreshadowing because at the beginning it sets up like, what the fuck is that? And then at the end you sort of figure it out. In the middle you sort of figure it out and you're like, oh, it's this kind of like blade collar trap in the vein of like Saw, if Saw was stupider.
Yeah, exactly.
My problem with this movie is that or one of my problems, I love the steampunk aesthetic. I love it. And the problem is this movie isn't smart enough to pull off steampunk well. Because the steampunk is sort of where this movie actually gets bogged down. It's where the movie gets dumb. So, for instance, one of the main features of this movie is that giant mechanical spider mech at the end, right? Super cool, great. It's a great looking kind of spectacle and sort of this like, how are we going to fight these overwhelming odds kind of way. Except there's no way that a machine like that would be able to be supported on legs like that. It's just not possible. Right? There's a reason spiders don't get too big. They would fail under their own weight.
Yeah.
So like, there's physical problems with it. That just. I will say that I did like Dr. Arliss Lovelace's, like, he has the spider theme going on in like everything he wears or does. Mm-hmm. And like all the things that he makes has this sort of like
evil villain theming.
Yeah,
like
but
top tier.
But it's not just like evil villain theming, like, oh, we're going to make him look like a fascist. Because that's often what movies fall back on, is like, oh, we'll just dress him in black and red because those are evil colors and associated with Nazism. And then we'll put skulls on them because skulls are bad, right? Or we'll dress him to look like with like very, very overtly fascist symbolism, like the way that Darth Vader's helmet is not a Nazi helmet, but it's like a World War I German style helmet and then they just put the face mask in the front of it. Like those are the kinds of things where it's like, oh yeah, like we're clearly trying to pay homage or tell the audience using shorthand that he's a villain. And yes, we still have that shorthand. He still wears all black and he still has like a creepy mustache and talks very effeminately, which are all signs of classic tropes for evil villains. But the spider aesthetic is at least unique to him as a character.
Yes.
And I thought they played with that, like in all of his architecture. There's like webbing in all of his clothing. It's an interesting idea. Yeah. And all of his hench people.
Yeah, I liked him as a villain.
Yeah, Kenneth Branagh, I actually think makes this really sort of sinister, eccentric, slightly comedic, off-kilter comedian. In a lot of ways, he kind of makes this movie. Because you're like, oh, he's very sinister and evil, but he's very charismatic. Like, he's fun to watch. Like anytime something happens, you're like, what's this plan all about, Mr. Dr. Lovelace? Like, how are you going to get out of this one? That kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm intrigued to see where this is going to go. And there is a sinister quality to him that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were a lot of moments where I just had to push through, like, I don't know, the right close to the end where Will Smith shows up as a woman and starts dancing, and I'm like, no one sees this as suspicious? Like, no one is worried about this random woman who just showed up
in the middle of an assembly, like
the middle of this big thing? Like,
yeah, it's so frustrating. Yeah, there's I mean, what's it? The whole idea is that it's supposed to be a callback to, like, that's Artemis Gordon's shtick.
Yeah,
like,
that they have to kind of trade off a little bit of what they're doing.
Because it's like, oh,
their own styles.
They're rubbing off on each other, because at the heart of it, this is a buddy cop film.
It 100%
100%, right? The problem that I actually have with this buddy cop film is Will Smith's character, James West, is actually fairly compelling.
Yes.
I actually don't like Kevin Kline's character in this. Artemis is very like, it's almost comedic. Like he's just sort of eccentric inventor that gives us more steampunk stuff, but it's not well done. I'm not invested in his character at all. I don't know his motivation. I don't know.
Yeah, what is he there for? Why is he doing this other than his, I guess, needing to serve his country?
Yeah.
There's no. I mean, I guess for some people that's a very compelling thing, but it's never serving their country. It's never really brought up or tested, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not. He's just sort of there as this comedic foil to James West, and but James West has like this vengeance plot going on, and it's not very well explored, but it has this vengeance plot going for him where he's trying to get back at the whole massacre at New Liberty, where his family was killed by General bloodbath McGrath, but it turns out it wasn't McGrath. It was actually Loveless. So there's like a, oh, okay, I'm following where your trajectory is going here, even though it's not really all that well explored in terms of themes of vengeance. At least I'm with James. He's our main character. He's very, very interesting, right?
Yeah.
So I actually, most of this movie, I actually get really frustrated with Artemis Gordon. I think he's just a kind of a boring character who's there for comedic purposes.
I think now a pitch is coming to my brain that I
yes.
think would be a really
I love
cool
it when
idea.
you do this.
I think that instead of having Artemis as his partner, maybe having Rita just show up and kind of
Just stop, because you're doing my pitch.
Oh no. Okay. Okay.
No.
Anyways,
I didn't actually mean to interrupt you.
She would have been a really great I'm like, I'm trying to find my father, help me, and then it turns out that she's actually like a government agent or something. I thought that would be really funny.
I need you. I was only joking, but now I definitely need you to stop because you're getting very close to my pitch. I
just really wanted to see more Rita because I thought she was great. She seemed powerful. She was sly.
Yeah,
but I liked that.
Selma Hayek as Rita was a really, really interesting choice, and they did nothing with her. It's so disappointing. I
wish that we could have seen so much more of her.
At one point in time, they sort of leave her behind at the train station. Like, Texas is on the way to Oklahoma. We could at least taken it with her. And it gives us an excuse for her to, like, sneak onto the train, which is fun and fine. But it's sort of like, are we only doing this because of plot? Like, I feel like the only reason Rita isn't in this is because of plot. Like, I actually think that Rita and James are more interesting than this. Especially because what Rita winds up being is this point of contention between James and Artemis. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, but why? Like, and then at the end, she clearly is her own woman. It wasn't her father; it was her husband, and it's sort of funny, but it's played off comedically as opposed to character growth. And I find that frustrating. Like, she's really only just used for this. Yeah. At one point in time, when she like pressed the gas button on the pool cues, and like the gas goes everywhere, and then she winds up getting. She winds up in a meeting where she's basically hostage by Arliss. I actually thought they were going to turn it around, and it turned out that she wasn't looking for her father. She was actually going to be working with Arliss.
That's what I thought too.
And I almost kind of wish that's what had happened, because it would have brought her character more depth.
Yeah.
Because she's the only female character who has any kind of motivation in this movie. Because all of Loveless's henchwomen are... certainly interesting and powerful, but they have no character.
Yeah, they're just there to be cool and add some interest to Loveless's character, I guess.
Yeah, and like be like attractive women, because why not? But like Rita is the only female on screen who has any sort of character, and to have her like show agency by actually having worked for Loveless this whole time, and then like turn that around on James and Artemis, that would have been more interesting than what we got in this movie.
Yeah. Especially
because Selma Hayek, we know, she wasn't big back then, but nowadays Selma Hayek is huge, right? We know she's a fantastic actress. So should have let her loose a little bit more. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I have to say there was like one scene, two kind of tied in, that I thought were hilarious, and that was like the breast scene.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
I was like, oh my god, that's your problem. He like dumps out the grain, he puts water in. I feel my breast. It's just like, oh my god. it's so late 90s, early 2000s kind of humor. But it's so funny.
It's all right. It's not my favorite. It got a chuckle out of me. So what's interesting for me is I actually think if this movie had been almost like a dark comedy about a black cowboy, kind of like what they did in Blazing Saddles. I don't know if you've seen Blazing Saddles.
I have not.
Oh, you should watch Blazing Saddles.
I've been watching a lot of the really old stuff.
Okay, Blazing Saddles is a Mel Brooks film. Like the guy.
That's probably why I've stayed
Baseballs.
away from it, actually.
You don't like Mel Brooks?
I'm not a huge fan.
Well, Blazing Saddles is a fantastic Western movie that's basically a searing indictment on racism through the lens of a Western, like classic Western tropes. It's really, really, actually really cleverly done. I don't think it would be, I wouldn't do this movie quite that way, but I would do it like a dark comedy because there's a scene where everyone in the congregation in New Orleans at Lovelace's estate goes outside and they're basically going to lynch James, like Will Smith's character.
Yep.
And it's not played dark, but because of the present climate of the way that race has come about in especially in the United States, but basically in the West as a whole, towards black people, I think that like if they had played this like a dark comedy where it's about all this terrible stuff like lynching and racism and the South rising again, still set in a Western time, but then had like James West play it off in this dark comedic way, I think that this movie actually could have been like really clever, like more clever than it is. Instead of sort of being a slapstick buddy comedy Western, it could have been this like really clever subversion of like horrible things that had happened to black people in those times, except you play it like a comedy. And of course I would have it be written and done by and directed by African American and black people, because I think that's just in better taste, and I don't have
definitely
I don't have the necessarily the sense or the perspective to get that right. But I'm thinking about a movie like Black Klansman, where there's this sort of like dark humor going on through the whole thing, but it's clearly a comedy, but there's like serious tones to it. So if you don't know, Black Klansman is basically, the central premise is that they're trying to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan, but it's a black dude who then gets a white dude to pretend to be him so that he can get into the Ku Klux Klan. Like, so it's serious. Like, we're still talking about racism, but the premise is already kind of funny, right? Or inherently humorous. And so you play it like that. And I do think like there is a way to do that this movie touched on. That was like, we could make this
briefly.
Yeah, just very briefly, that we could make this very, very, very poignant while still being like this dark comedy. And just briefly, because most of this movie isn't like that, but I saw it there and I was like, that's an interesting take. And I did consider pitching that, but like I said, I don't think I have the perspective to be able to pull that off properly.
It's funny you say that, because I had the same idea and I was like, I don't know if I would have. I don't know. I don't have any of the same experience that other people have.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I don't think I would be able to pull it off in a way that is like true.
Yeah, like both appropriate and well done.
Appropriate,
right?
yeah.
So, which sucks
that's
because it's there. And you like, you and I both had it. It's there, but yeah. It's unfortunate.
And having Will Smith play as James West was a brilliant idea, because he can be serious, but he can also be hilarious, and it's just like the perfect. Yeah, he's just great. Yeah,
and it works for this film because Will Smith sort of plays the same character no matter what he's in. Like, he sort of just is always Will Smith. But I actually think, especially in that scene where he's up on the stage and they're gonna like hang him from a tree, which is really dark when you think about it. Is like that, because it's Will Smith and you're sort of like watching Will Smith play himself play James West. It's like there's a comedy to it, a weird kind of like, we're peeking out from behind the screen, if you will. You know what I mean? Like we as the audience are looking at Will Smith be like, yeah, let me make some jokes about this, even though it's really quite dark when you think about it. But the scene itself isn't played that dark. I think part of the reason that we think it's dark is because social perspectives have changed around race quite a bit in the last couple of years. Yeah.
So there was in my drama class recently, we had the privilege of watching there was like a one-person play called The Deer Woman. And
DEER or DEAR?
DEER.
Like Antlers Woman.
And yeah. And so it's about an indigenous woman who is like two-spirited. She's one spirit is human and another spirit is deer. But she sees herself as like a male deer. And it's kind of like a revenge story, but throughout the whole thing, she plays this like role of like, she's very tough, like very tough. And a few times she pretends to break down and cry, and then she'll come back at you like, I got you. You thought I was crying. And it's like one of the things, I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, but one thing that we talked about when we were talking about that play was, if you're going to show someone who has, I guess, had to deal with, like, I don't want to call it subjugation.
Any kind of trauma.
But if you've shown them in only ways that they have, that really puts them in a sad light, then you're not representing them. You're just putting them down, right? So putting Will Smith up there and having him be able to joke and be resilient against that situation of like, oh, like his character might just get like hanged. It's showing that resilience. They're actually like kind of showing the defiance, and it's a little bit more true, I think, to the history.
Comedy
right?
is a way to deal with any kind of tragedy, right? It's something that a lot of people have used, both appropriately and inappropriately, to get over their trauma, whether that be a collective trauma or a personal trauma, right? And it's done in various ways. But that's why I think like this dark comedy that we keep talking about would work. It's like, and it would have to be done really carefully.
Yeah.
But because you're right, because it's sort of like Will Smith up there talking about this kind of historical thing, it has this sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of way that it works.
Yeah.
Both in a resilience and in a comedy. Like, it's the comedy is the rebellion. And in that one instance, it's really, really interesting, especially because, like you say, the rest of this movie is sort of this slapstick buddy comedy where they talk about touching each other's fake boobs, right? Like, there's too much,
which brought about this whole thing with the lynching, though, because he's like drumming on the
ladies'
on the
boobies,
white woman's titties, right?
So, but like, it's very interesting that one moment really made us both go, huh? Right? Like, this one dark moment really made us both sit there and think, well, what the fuck is going on there? But
and it's so deep, but it's still also so funny in that moment because he takes command of the whole
he's
scene.
just like, hang on a second, It's funny that like one moment becomes one of the stronger parts of this film. And it's kind of tragic that Kevin Kline as Artemis Gordon, and he also plays the president, is kind of the less good part, because I actually really like Kevin Kline. He's a pretty good actor. And I don't know, it was kind of disappointing to see him sort of relegated to this comedic, secondary character who's really only, I mean, he has an arc, I guess. I mean, none of the characters really have an arc. Like, this movie is basically just like an action movie where the characters do stuff, and it's entertaining enough. Like, I had a fun time with it. Like, you're watching, it's just, so for instance, when I say like they just go from place to place to place, it's coherent, but when the magnet clanks onto the rail, and they're like, it's Loveless's private railway track, I was like, when the fuck did we learn that Loveless had a private railway track?
I was thinking the exact same thing.
Like, I mean, it's great because they're just sort of skipping ahead, but I was also like, when the fuck did we learn about this? Like, that makes you're just assuming? Did we know this? Did I miss something? Did somebody stroke out? Like, what happened there? And then they just sort of skip over that and go right into the action.
I think the only person that actually had an arc, like for real, was Will Smith's character, because in the end, he did get his revenge. It's him that pulled the lever that sent Loveless into the canyon.
That's true, yeah. Because he doesn't, and because the whole thing that happens with McGrath is it sets up with his revenge story with McGrath, and then he doesn't get to be the one to kill McGrath, but it turns out that it's all Loveless's plan anyway, which means that he, like that through transitive properties, he winds up going after Loveless and does get his revenge, and even gets to say that line, like, that's a whooping. But
and the movie is called The Wild Wild West, and his character's name is
Jim
James
West. So it's just, it's the themes of revenge are not exactly ones that I would put to this movie in a hardcore manner.
Yeah.
it's not like I said, it's not a bad movie. It's just it's not really a revenge story. The themes of revenge are there minimally. It's much more a buddy cop movie.
Yeah.
Now I will say, as far as the comedy goes, and the hijinks and the slapstick and even the fight scenes, it's there. It is really quite good that way. I do have one point or nitpick that I'll make about like the slapstick comedy. The fight scenes are great when they happen. My only problem is the fight scene when they're on the giant spider. I thought was a little long. It just drags a little bit.
I agree.
And they constantly show how like quick of a draw James West is. Like he'll like all of a sudden.
So why hasn't he done it?
He like shoots, I think like 6 bullets in the whole movie.
Yeah.
And like I want to see an actual shootout, guys. Like you keep setting his character up to be like this, you know, these fast hands, this quick draw, gun to your face, you know what I mean? But like the only time we ever see him do anything is when he's in Lovelace's office and there's all the guys in the paintings.
Yep.
And he just like do. And you're like, there's also way more dudes that fall out of the paintings than there are shots that he shot. So that's a thing. But I wanted there to be
I guess canonically he's got bullets that can hit more than one person.
Sure, why not? But I wanted there to be like a classic shootout, you know what I mean? I wanted him to show how good of a shooter he is, cuz really all we get is a lot of like classic bar fights and then the fight on the spider and it's fun, but it's not nothing amazing happens that way.
I think the reason they avoided that was because they wanted Artemis's character in the end to be able to use a gun at some point. Like he's got that little teeny tiny gun.
Because he's all like, oh, if I resort to violence, like then I see that as a personal failure. Okay, here's the thing, because that's supposed to sort of come across as like an arc when he puts the teeny tiny gun on his pencil holder and like shoots Lovelace and like gets rid of his hydraulics, which by the way is not how that works, because each leg would probably have its own personal hydraulic system, so he would just be down to 3 legs, not lose all 4.
I mean, unless he's not smart and he just put all of them on one system.
I feel like that's a bad way to do that.
Did he do the same thing with the spider? Why didn't they just, shoot out one leg of the spider then?
Yeah, see, this movie, that's where it doesn't make sense. Is I'm not super familiar with hydraulics, but I'm pretty sure each leg usually has its own separate system.
Usually has its own, because then you gotta have it like pressurized and stuff. And
so
I think
I don't know. I'd have to ask a hydraulic engineer, but that's the way that I would do it. It seems rather dumb to do it any other way, especially because then you'd have to have a high pressure system that's controlling all the legs at the same time. Why not?
It'd be too much work.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, so I know that that's supposed to be like an arc for Gordon, for Artemis, like when he pulls the thing out and shoots, because like he never does things violently, but then he's sort of taking James's, way of doing things on his own. And that's not really an arc though, because there isn't really like a character growth associated with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no character growth there. So I would have liked if there was a bit more like shooting out. I will say that I think this movie, the slapstick fighting is fun, but I will say that there's a couple scenes where they're doing like verbal jokes, like the one where they're touching each other's fake boobies. That's pretty funny. But there's also one where Lovelace and James meet for the first time on screen.
Yeah.
And they just keep making jokes about how one's missing legs and is now short and the other is making jokes about how he's a racist towards black people. And it's a fun play on words despite being like horribly racist and ableist. It's fun play on words. Like you're watching this and you're like the thinly veiled threats and the way they talk about each other, like it's funny. I like it.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying about this dark comedy. But it's also supposed
to be like, they're supposed to be threatening each other, and it's, it's very dark, but it is very, it's funny.
That's why I like about this dark comedy. I think it's good. Yeah. What's interesting about this movie is like, I wanted to know if there ever was a U.S. Marshal who was black, and there was. His name was Bass Reeves. He was the first black U.S. Marshal, and he lived during this time.
Yep.
So the difference here is that this movie is like slicked up Hollywood Wild Wild West, not really like real Wild West. Like the way that that James West carries himself and talks and dresses is like very unrealistic. Like you can tell, like that's why I think the steampunk thing works for this, because it's weird how serious this movie takes itself, but it's also this like almost surrealistic anti-history.
Yeah.
And it's, this movie has like a lot of ideas that it tried to do, like the steampunk's like sort of alternate history that I think would have been really interesting if they'd leaned into that further. Like this is not the world that you knew. This is actually like an alternate history in which different things happened.
Yeah.
Because there's like the Wild West was not anything like what we saw in this movie at all. So, and I'm not just talking about the steampunk stuff. I'm talking about like the actual West was way dirtier, and people don't like to admit it, but the West was pretty much won on the backs of like women, prostitution. Yep. So, because that's where a lot of the business was. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't really have anything else other than the part where James falls 80 feet straight onto his back.
And doesn't die. Like the bullet's one thing, but like the fact that he falls 80 feet straight onto his back and doesn't have any kind of damage. Yeah, and they called it the impenetrable, like the
impermeable,
the chainmail, impermeable. Yeah. But I don't actually think that would have stopped a bullet.
Yeah,
because it's chainmail and that has holes.
I don't know. I've never seen chainmail stop a bullet. Again, I'm not a ballistics expert, so I don't know.
I'd be curious to know. I'm gonna Google it.
Liz is gonna look that up, and while she's looking that up, I will rant more about this movie. Yeah, I did like all the hijinks. Let me see. Okay, so you know the part where the president.
I like how as soon as I type "can chainmail stop a bullet" is the
first one.
The first one.
And can it?
It will stop a bullet as long as you don't throw it too hard, apparently.
As long as you don't throw the bullet too hard?
Apparently.
So basically, no, it won't stop a bullet.
No, I don't think so.
And you just have a bunch of chainmail shrapnel stuck in your bullet wound.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
So you know the scene where the president is like giving his speech as he's about to like knock the last peg of the railway in?
Yep.
Okay, the spider like shows up and all of a sudden everyone notices. It's way too close for everyone to just sort of be like, "Oh no, look." Like nobody goes, "What's that in the distance?" Like,
yeah,
it's like
not like as it's coming and you wouldn't hear that. I would think it would be very noisy.
Yeah, right? But I just can't believe that an 80-foot tall mechanical spider, nobody was on the, like, especially because the audience is facing him, which means that the spider would have been to his back when he's trying to smash the last rail spike in. And it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, nobody would see that. Like they're all facing. Nobody's gonna be like, "Hey, what the fuck is that in the background?" And also has like a giant plume of smoke coming out of it because it's steampunk or diesel punk, right? Irritating. Yeah. It's the realistic parts of this that really. It's the steampunk parts that are unfortunately the weakest part of this because the Western stuff was at least slick and fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they also needed it to, I guess, keep Loveless, quote unquote, alive.
I guess. Well, that was actually really cool. They also didn't
have to completely like cut him in half, right?
I actually think they should have done more with that, and I did a little bit with my pitch in that.
Yeah.
Because like apparently he's missing organs and whatnot, but he's still alive. Like do something with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't really touch much of the steampunk stuff because I just didn't want to accidentally write like a 30-page thing because I knew I would do that if I thought
steampunk
about it.
Is the coolest.
Yeah. I had one other thing that I thought was really great about this movie, and that was that they rode into the sunset at the end, which is like a classic trope, but it was on the spider, which was just so funny.
It also feels like they were like somewhat somewhat setting up for a sequel. Like, they sort of left it open-ended, like, oh, we're starting the U.S. Secret Service with the two of them as the beginning agents, and then they, like, ride off back to Washington, D.C. And you're sort of like, okay, this could have had a sequel if it was popular enough. I don't remember how popular this movie was, but it's 1999, so it's been, 20 years and then some since this movie came out. So I feel like we're not going to get a sequel. Not that I would say no to one if they handled it well. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I would do it with Will Smith and Kevin Kline, but...
Yeah, I don't know.
Would you watch a sequel to this movie?
If it was about Rita.
If it was about Rita. Okay. Well, then you'll like my pitch.
Okay. I think you'll like mine because mine is also kind of about Rita.
So we've been teasing my pitch, I guess, but apparently yours as well. So would you like?
Can I go first?
Okay, sure. Are you happy with your pitch?
Because so you know how I come in here almost every week or every time that we do an episode, and I'm just like, I wrote mine when I was really tired. Yeah. Right. Well, last night when I wrote my pitch, I was beyond tired.
Oh wow. Okay. Because this is not my best pitch by far. After
we did band practice, I came home. And 5 minutes after I came home, while I was still unloading the car, my brother came to visit.
Oh, nice.
And so I had no time for rest. It was just right into, social situation. And then I was like trying to like write it on the sly while we were like hanging out. And then I had to finish it later. And I was in bed by like 10. Wow. I was so zonked by the end of the day.
All right, hit me with it.
This is a really rough pitch. Okay. So just that, warning, I guess. Okay. Okay. So yeah, we're following Rita, just straight up. So we start in the brothel. Rita is sneaking her way in, and at the same time we see like a very bulky woman doing the same. They're both trying to woo the same man, which we find out kind of throughout this that it's General
Bloodbath McGrath.
Bloodbath McGrath, thank you. And eventually the large woman who reveals herself as a man, who is the federal agent later, wins the man over. And so we get that, I guess, kind of goofy scene of Artemis trying to hypnotize Bloodbath McGrath, which was kind of goofy. During that, we learned who he is and about the massacre. We find out that there are some scientists who have gone missing and one who was recently found dead. And while we're learning this stuff, Rita is trying to like eavesdrop from the other room. So she kicked out a couple of people who were, it's like a brothel.
Copulating.
So they're doing, she's trying to eavesdrop. And then I guess we'll have Will Smith's character kind of do the same thing where he bashes in the window and starts a fight, trying to kill the general. So the whole time Rita is eavesdropping, and once this fight kind of breaks out, she takes the opportunity to be like, "Oh, General, you were such a hero on the battlefield. Please let me help you out of this awful situation." And then she's like, if you, like, once they're out, because she, like, helps him find a safer place to be, she's like, if you could, I would love to have, like, a permanent job that is a lot more, quote-unquote, respectable, and, like, just help me find that, because I saved you. You have connections. Whatever, right? So I wasn't sure how exactly I was going to get this to happen, but basically she is introduced to Dr. Lovelace as like, oh, she's like the other strong women that you have. She has her own ideals and wants to be powerful. I don't know. And then she ends up doing a convincing job of like getting Lovelace to hire her. It was like, yeah, I want to work for you. Let me do something that's great and powerful and great for the country. Blah, 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 blah. I thought that it would be okay to keep that same kind of thing where they throw her in the cage as like a quote unquote like test or like a final trial, and like maybe implying that the other women have to deal with Loveless in a sexual capacity.
You're so uncomfortable right now.
Yeah. But you know, that's part of their test to work for them or to work for him. And then she's about to escape on her own when Artemis comes in and is like, "Oh, let me save you." And she's like, "Oh, a handsome man, he saved me." And then she like earns his trust by telling him the sob story of like, "My dad's a scientist and I'm here to find him," and yada yada yada. So then they meet up with West, who is the same man who broke into the brothel and started the fight, and it turns out that they are longtime frenemies / partners, West and Artemis. And then she has fun teasing them both because, you know, why not? I thought that was kind of funny, actually, was playing around with her. Because we already know she's good looking and she can probably get men. And then, so nighttime rolls around, she locks the door to the bedroom that she's staying in on the train. She eavesdrops for a while. Again, I'm like skipping over so much.
Yep, it's all good.
My brain was like fried when I wrote this. She finds out about like the whole list of missing scientists, and like she kind of just listens in about what's been happening. They find out that there's been a couple massacres, not just the one at Fort
New Liberty.
No, what was it? New Liberty, thank you. And so they're kind of like speculating that Loveless is behind it all. And they also talk about how they recently found Bloodbath McGrath dead in one of these massacres, even though they thought that he was the one doing the massacres because that's where he gets his name. So then I also really liked Loveless's like steampunk train that can, for some reason, stand on very thin legs and
stupid,
hide.
like,
it was so stupid, but I also really liked it. Like I thought it was just like it's so over the top.
That's some Hanna-Barbera shit.
Yeah. So you know, we can do that in this time. Like Rita, quote unquote, like unknowingly sets off the sleeping gas bomb, and ends up back on Loveless's train. And she's like, "Look, I delivered them to you because they were, you know, sniffing around your mansion and they thought they saved me, but it was all for you, blah, blah, blah." So she's like doing like this whole like double agent kind of thing.
Sneaky.
So then she basically is like, you know, I don't want to do that trial. Like I was looking for a job to get out of doing sexual favors for men for money. She says, I don't want to do that trial, but I'll do anything else for you. And he's like, all right, well, after everything is said and done, you'll kill the president for me.
Damn.
She's just like,
that's
whoa, okay. Right? So then she's like, yeah, okay. And she's like really laying it on thick, like, oh, the South should have won the war. And, you know, with you as the new president. And he's just like, wait, I'm not going to be the new president. We have a completely different plan. And then we don't hear the plan. The audience doesn't. So they bring her to Spider Canyon, where she's basically told she'll just have to sit and wait until the president is back. But then she's like, but I want to come. Like, I want to be able to help collect him, since it'll be my duty in the end to pull the trigger. And Loveless is like, all right, you're like really committed. Sure, you can come along. I like having, you know, more hands around to help. They hop on the giant spider thing and they head out and they collect the president. They almost get thwarted by West and Artemis. And they capture West and Artemis because Rita pretends that she's being forced to do things, but ends up like not like physically backstabbing, but like backstabbing the two men. And then she falls out of the spider, but like they think that she dies falling out of the spider, but we actually see like she grabbed a chain that just happened to like fly out with her, and then she ends up like just kind of letting herself down gently, and then waiting for them to kind of disappear. So Lovelace is actually really like upset because he's like, oh, she was my new toy or something like that, something really gross. So from there we can see, I called it an expo, like that big meeting thing.
Congregation, yeah, expose.
Congregation, yeah. With all the leaders who are trying to get parts of America.
That was poorly explained, but essentially I think what was happening is Lovelace was doing it because they were, because he was like France, England, and Spain all wanted parts of the United America. States back, but it was just badly explained. Yeah. So I didn't really go too deep into that, but not that you need to.
So this is the only time where we're like actually watching Lovelace more than like, we don't get anything of Rita because like everyone thinks she's dead.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of expo, and they've got the president, Artemis, and West all kind of chained up, and they're all bickering with each other because clearly they know each other, right? They work closely, I guess. And then Rita walks in, and she's actually, because she really wanted to like lay it on thick that she like came back from the dead. Like she's got blood, like fake blood all over, and she's like torn shirt, like just everything, right? And she comes in, she's like, I came back from the dead for you, and like fake crying, and Lovelace is just like, oh my dear, your commitment is like, I don't know,
undying,
a really great word, big, wonderful, I don't know. And but then she stabs him.
Damn.
And he doesn't die.
Damn.
Because he's missing organs, so he's replaced his organs with like little things that work to do the same thing.
Like
because it's steampunk.
Because it's steampunk.
Mechanical organs, yeah. So there's a lot of mechanisms in his body and keeping him shielded and alive, and she ends up forcing him down and putting one of the collars on him.
The magnetic collar, yeah.
Yep. And right before he was about, like, or right before one of the other women was about to turn the machine on to kill West, Artemis, and the president.
President, yeah.
Yep.
Clever.
So it stops everyone's hands. And then, I really, what? I have one little tiny paragraph here to explain what happens at the end, and it doesn't make any sense. So I think somewhere along the lines, like I just have, I'll read you verbatim what I have written. It's not even a proper sentence. Okay. She saves the day and the men, and stops the world, or the rest of the world, from essentially recolonizing America. And then in the end, the president offers her a job, but she admits that she was sent here by the Canadian, like the Commonwealth government, to keep an eye on Lovelace, since his next plot would probably be against Canada.
Wow.
At the end. I don't know what happened to my brain at the end there.
Well, your ending went a little off the rails, if you'll excuse my train pun.
Yeah, but I mean, up until then, I think it was an okay.
What I liked about your pitch,
I don't know how I would have finished the end.
What I liked about,
because we have the collar on him, and then what?
What I liked about your pitch is that it wasn't so much a repitch as it was like, what if Rita was an actual character?
Yeah,
like same story, but what if Rita was an actual character?
And I had it following Rita because I thought that she would be really cool to watch, and we have no idea what her actual motivations are throughout the whole thing until the very end, where she's like, I'm actually Canadian.
Which is such a weird twist.
Don't know what I was doing. I was so tired.
Canada was a thing at the time, because this takes place in 1869, I think, or 1868.
But were we still like technically? I mean, I guess we were the Commonwealth.
No, Canada, Confederacy in Canada, Confederation in Canada, I should say, was in 1867.
Okay, so it's like newly founded by the time this movie comes out.
It's 2 or 3 years old by the time that this movie happens. But yeah, 1867.
So yeah, sure. She's a Canadian agent
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know where my brain was going with the rest of the ending.
Here's a weird... Maybe she works for the RCMP. Here's a weird thing for you, because the RCMP is actually legally allowed to operate in the United States. It's like one of the only foreign military or paramilitary groups that's allowed to operate within the United States. Yeah, so the RCMP.
Cool. Okay, I guess she's an RCMP agent.
That's pretty cool.
Officer or whatever.
I like yours. It's just nice to see like what would Rita do if she was an actual character in that version. So
I wish that I was a little bit more awake towards the end of writing it, though.
All right. My version starts out the same way, with James West hunting down a dude named General Bloodbath McGrath, and James is not a U.S. Marshal. He's just after revenge, so he's like a pseudo bounty hunter. So James tracks McGrath down to a saloon where he finds McGrath giving his attentions to a lady. James then tries to dismiss the lady in the same way, and then he goes to shoot McGrath, but the woman stops him. And in this version, she's actually a woman, because it's Rita, still played by Selma Hayek.
Okay, so you did. Yeah,
Rita's trying to get information out of McGrath. Say again? Say that again?
I said this was my little pseudo pitch halfway through.
Yeah. So Rita's trying to get information out of McGrath to see who he works for. And then we can have this sort of like funny fight where James is trying to shoot McGrath, but Rita's trying to stop James, and McGrath is now trying to kill both of them, but they have to keep each other quiet so that all the patrons in the saloon none of McGrath's men in the saloon will like come running. So they're all like trying to like hush each other up, and they can't shoot any of their guns and whatnot. And but they're like bumping into walls and everything. So like next door, everyone thinks that McGrath and Rita are just having like really, really, really rough sex. But finally James is successful, and he shoots McGrath in the side of the face. So it like hits him across the cheek and across the ear. And he's like a whole person. He's like, there's no weird steampunk stuff.
He's not.
Yeah. It just like blasts across his face. And they basically leave him for dead. And then because of the shot, all of McGrath's men are showing up, and James believes that he's got to get out of there because the men are trying to capture them, but he also thinks he has to be a pseudo gentleman and save Rita too, except she doesn't really need saving, and she pulls a knife out of her bodice, and like just we can have a classic sort of kind of fun saloon fight scene as they escape. Once they escape, Rita is furious at James for killing McGrath because she thinks he's just a bounty hunter, even though there's no bounty on McGrath. She's like, there's no bounty on him. And she wanted information out of him. And James is like, well, I'm actually doing it for revenge. And is perplexed by any woman would want information out of McGrath. And Rita explains that she is actually a whore, a prostitute, but she works with a U.S. Marshal and was actually trying to get information out of him in order to uncover something about a group of people who won't let the Civil War die and want to start a revolution. So James really isn't interested. He's just like, I just wanted revenge for what McGrath did, and I got it. And it was after his whole town, which is called New Liberty, was massacred. And this, in my version, this takes place like several years after the war, like it does in the movie as well. So,
okay.
But Rita is basically like, that's exactly what we're trying to uncover, because New Liberty wasn't a one-time thing. Similar events have been happening to smaller towns all over, especially towns with white people, where black people are they're just basically massacred out and out, and then all of a sudden there's like no survivors. Like there's dead bodies everywhere, but there's no survivors. We can't tell what happened to them. They must have been taken. So we're trying to figure out what's going on. And we don't think it's all happening because of General McGrath, because he's not that clever. So this has James interested, and so Rita takes James to meet the U.S. Marshal she works for. It's a man named Felix Gordon. And Felix is an older white man who used to be a soldier for the Union Army in the North, but he stayed as a U.S. Marshal after the war had ended. When he was younger, he says he was a lot like James. He used to go in guns blazing, but as he got older, he settled down and he had to learn to work much smarter, especially after he lost one of his arms in the war. So Felix explains that there's some kind of like small revolution going on where towns are being wiped out, especially those having large black population. And they're trying to figure out what's going on. So Felix is like, I want West to come with us because he's a quick draw and he's young and capable. And Rita's like, and James wants to come because he wants revenge. And Rita's like, well, I want to come too, because, I actually am really, really useful. And they're sort of like, yeah, all right, you can. James is like, I don't think we need a woman, but Felix is like, you'd be surprised what a capable woman is capable of, right? So, so they go to New Orleans because that's the one piece of information that Rita did get. They go to New Orleans and they're going into basically this party, same idea. And Rita's going in as one of the service, like to provide entertainment and basically be a prostitute. And she explains that what she saw was she was working she owned her own brothel in one of the towns that got wiped out, and a monster rolled into town and it like roared and growled, and all of a sudden it shot bullets, and she watched as like the patrons and everyone in her town basically got like wiped out, like torn apart, and then the creature left. And she like ran away once it happened, and so she didn't stay to see if there were any survivors or anything like that. So the trio heads to New Orleans. Rita goes into the guise of being an entertainer, prostitute. Felix goes in as though he was invited, and both of them tell Wes, they're like, don't come in because you're a black dude, and that's just going to be problems for a bunch of people in the South. So just like, don't like, we'll call you if we need backup in case we need someone to like come in guns blazing. But James isn't about that, and so he sneaks in anyway. So Rita is recognized by none other than General Bloodbath McGrath, who is alive and has half his face replaced with like a metal plate, and his ear is now a mechanical horn, and he kind of looks like weirdly, steampunk. So she winds up getting captured. James manages to sneak into an office, and he finds out where the next attack is going to happen, like the next city. And he also overhears a conversation, but we can't see with who. He overhears them talk about how the president has no idea how the finances will work, and there won't be an issue with funding, nor will there be any problems with getting any of the labor, especially now that they've managed to get so much new land. And James is like, what does this have to do with killing people? Like, why are they trying to acquire new land, especially when all that land is not in the South, but it's out west, like way west. Meanwhile, Felix has a run-in with a man named Dr. Armitage, who explains he's an expert in mechanical anatomy and prosthetics, and explains that he could replace Felix's lost arm because he's already done a lot with replacing prosthetics and whatnot. And then he introduces, he's like, you should meet my friend General McGrath, who I recently just did some work on his face. Of course, McGrath is busy, So Rita, while she's detained, discovers that McGrath was basically dying of blood loss, was brought back to life by Dr. Armitage, who they call the necromancer of the South. And he slowly used basically during the war, he would like pick apart dead bodies to see how anatomy worked and try to bring them back to life using steampunk shit. So that's why they call him the necromancer of the South. And he's also the one who's trying to revive the South. He's basically trying to use like dead black people as like basically desecrating their bodies to like bring them back to life, so they'll be perpetual slaves.
Terrible.
Yeah, in the actual party, Dr. Armitage thanks everyone for coming, and this is all from Felix's point of view. He explains why they were all invited because they share his vision or are either donating or helping him reach his goal. He then also introduces his largest benefactor, named Arliss Lovelace, and we see a man in a mechanical wheelchair talk about Armitage's goal and how the doctor saved his life when he was mortally wounded, and that he believes in creating a great nation, again on the backs of those who need to know their place. Felix then winds up saving Rita while West shoots his way out of the party. Yay. The trio then go to the town where the next attack is supposed to happen. They find a regular town with a lot of free black folk living there. In the night, Rita hears the sound of the creature coming and says that's the sound, and then this tank comes in and blows the whole place apart. And then I thought it would be funny if we had a joke here, because Rita had said like this creature had rolled into town, and James had thought she was turning a phrase, but literally it rolled into town like on wheels. And he's like, it's a tank. So in all the chaos of everything, the trio's captured. They wake up and they're in Dr. Armitage's lab, and it turns out that not all the black people were killed. They're basically being taken away. So the three can try to escape, and they still don't know where all the surviving black folk are. And Felix can find an arm that would like work on him, but he chooses not to use it because of like how the circumstances of how it was made, like, and all those who lost their lives to use it. And so they're like basically getting the one up on Dr. Armitage when Dr. Armitage calls for help, and Bloodbath McGrath shows up and tells them that actually none of them worked for Dr. Armitage. They basically just needed him. Like, they all work for Loveless, and they just needed Armitage's work to get some distractions and things going underway. They don't actually want the South to rise, so bye. And he basically kills... Or no, Felix kills Armitage and then blows up the factory. Yeah.
Okay.
So there, like, something's going on with Loveless, especially because Felix still thinks this is something to do with trying to bring the South back, but James is like, well, what about that whole thing that I heard about, like land and gold, and what's going on with that? And it's something about the president even. Yeah, so the trio can make their way to Arliss Lovelace's estate, and they're gearing up for an action sequence, but then that gets cut short comedically because the president is there. They're like getting ready to like go in, and they're like, it's the president. So Felix is invited in, and West has to sneak around, and Rita poses as Felix's wife, which I think would be comedic because I imagine Felix is significantly older than Rita. Like, I'm imagining like an old grizzled white dude who's like seen some shit, and that's why he's like careful and smart and planning, and Rita is this like not young, but younger, woman who used to own her own brothel and is very attractive. And now they're sort of like having to play off as like partners in matrimony, which I just think would be hilarious. And so they have to like do this whole thing. So it also, when James is sneaking around, he finds out that the slaves have all been taken to a bunch of the land that Arliss has bought out west, like California, way west. And the reason he's doing this is because he's trying to use the slaves as free labor, so they will dig in the mines to get gold, and then he's tricking the United States president, Ulysses Grant, into keeping the price of gold artificially high. So he's basically getting like free labor to mine gold, so that gold will be
like really
artificial.
expensive.
Yeah, so the gold's artificially high because he's tricking the president into like keeping the market there. And because Ulysses Grant is a general, he's not a financier or anything like that, or a politician. He has very little concept of what's happening. This is I'll get to that in a second. So then all hell breaks loose, and we can have Rita and Felix and West all do some awesome cowboy stuff and stop Loveless, and like Loveless would escape, and West finally gets to shoot McGrath like 4 times to make sure he stays dead. I just think that would be funny. So and then the pair during that, Felix would also die. He's dead. So the pair, then Rita and James, tell the president what's happening, and he's like, okay, I'm going to flood the market with gold, which appears on the surface to cause a financial disaster because now gold is basically worthless, which is a true historical thing that happened, by the way. I looked it up. And then it's called Black Friday. You can look it up. But what it actually does, so on the surface, is it looks like he's causing like economic distress because he doesn't know a lot about politics and the price of gold, like the markets and whatnot. But what we know, like what the audience knows, and what Rita, the president, and West know, is that what he's doing is devaluing Arliss's gold, so it's worth less.
Yeah. So
that he can buy less with it. He also decides to make James a marshal, a U.S. marshal. So Rita and West then head off to try and like set Loveless's slaves free and hunt him down. And they also, I think it would be awesome to have a cameo, like a famous person play Bass Reeves. So we can have like a cameo of the famous historical actual black U.S. Marshal. I think that's important. And then the pair find Loveless and can have a dope battle, and steampunk gunslinging cyborg that he is, but he's a steamborg, not a cyborg. So, and then they wind up winning, and it's all good and climactic battle. And then Rita wonders, if James can be a U.S. Marshal as a black man, she wonders if a woman who of Hispanic descent could be a U.S. Marshal, which sets us up for the sequel, because in Indiana in the 1870s, just after this time frame, there were actually ladies made U.S. Marshals, which I would set up as a sequel for Rita.
I love that idea so much.
Yeah, I tried to it's still steampunk and it's not actually accurate, but I did try to be like, Bass Reeves was alive during this time, and I feel like James West was very loosely based off of that character. So I was like, I want to have a cameo of Bass Reeves as a character. And then I was also like, the thing that happened with the gold, because Ulysses doesn't know anything about economics, actually is accurate. That did also happen. And there were actually lady U.S. Marshals or Marshal deputies that happened during the state of Indiana, because that place was seen as like the most lawless place in the United States for a long time. So I thought I'd play with that a little bit. And there's my pitch.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot more than mine. And
I had a little bit more maybe coherence
mine
when I wrote mine. So
yeah.
But
I think if I had the time to sit down and actually like write it out for a day, I think I'd have a something really cool, and then I could also like, you know, weave in a couple Canadian things into Rita's character before we get the big reveal that surprise, I'm Canadian, because I think that was just so out of left field, but also like a good idea.
I don't know when the RCMP was formed, so I don't know if that's probably before Confederation in Canada. So I don't know. But I actually would be excited to write a sequel to the pitch that I just did. I thought it'd be interesting to see like where I would go or what I would do, because I would still keep it steampunk, but I would try to be like, I don't know, maybe add a little bit of gothic something or other.
Yeah.
Maybe add a little bit of like a plague or a curse, and that's why Indiana was so dangerous. That'd be fun. Just play around with stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Any last minute thoughts about The Wild Wild West?
No.
It's a fun movie. It's not exactly the smartest movie I've ever seen, but I saw this movie in theaters when it first came out, and I didn't.
Wait, really?
Yeah, back in 1999.
Wow.
I gotta say, it was okay when I watched it then, and then I had seen it a couple times between now and then, and I've always been pretty varied on it. Watching it this time, I like with maybe a more critical eye, I didn't hate it as much as some of the other times I had watched it. It's not the best movie, but it's certainly like a slick, fairly well put together Hollywood movie.
That's kind of how I feel about The Legend of Zorro.
Yeah.
Which we watched together a while ago.
Which we have done a while ago.
It's good, it's funny, but it's not amazing.
Yeah, and there's some problems with it, but it's not amazing. And this feels a lot like that, like Zorro. Yeah.
And I think they came out around... No, Zorro is older, isn't it?
The one that we did? Yeah, I think it's like 95.
Yeah. Something like that. So either way, similar era, similar, I guess, situation.
Similar kind of action adventure, yeah. Where can people find you?
You can find me at twitch.tv/Alyssa Lou with 3 O's, or you can find some of my handmade stuff at Alyssa Rose Handmade on Instagram, and also now on Etsy. So that's cool.
That's super exciting. You can find our band Robot Philosopher wherever you listen to dope music. You're going to want to keep your eyes on any of the stuff we're doing, because some stuff's going to be happening within the next couple weeks. And you can always check out our other channel, the CineMasters, for more scripted content and analysis. And thanks so much for hanging out with us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because it helps our channels grow. Peace out.
Yeah. Bye.